The scribe's hand trembled as he dipped his reed into the ink, glancing over his shoulder as if the walls themselves might betray him. It was 4000 BC in the sacred heart of Nekhen, and already the rumor of forbidden love had stained more scrolls than royal edicts. In a temple chamber lit by flickering oil lamps and watched by silent jackal statues, he wrote in secret. She was a mere temple acolyte, he, a prince destined to rule. Their names were Nayat and Kashta, two souls never meant to touch, yet bound by something stronger than law: truth. Nayat had been raised among priestesses, taught to prepare offerings and read stars, her heart trained to serve the gods alone. But the gods had other plans. Kashta, the youngest son of Pharaoh Den, was never meant for the throne, so he roamed with questions the elders called dangerous. When he met Nayat during a new moon ritual, she was kneeling beside the sacred fire, whispering invocations that stirred the air like breath on skin. Their eyes met. Time fractured. Neither remembered what words were spoken, only that the silence afterward felt like a vow. Their meetings became stories scrawled in sand and wiped away with wind. Love grew beneath the gaze of Anubis, who they believed watched but did not judge. But love in Egypt was a political act, and soon the high priest sensed change in Nayat. Her fire was no longer just spiritual, and her gaze no longer drifted to the heavens but to the palace beyond the columns. He summoned her, demanding truth, threatening exile. And when her silence spoke more than any answer could, he marked her scroll of service with a black lotus, the symbol of dishonor. Meanwhile, Kashta's older brother, Rami, heir to the throne, had seen enough, not of the love but of the rebellion it represented. In Nayat, he saw a challenge to order. In Kashta's devotion, he saw betrayal. "You would trade a kingdom for a girl who carries jugs of milk?" Rami roared. Kashta said nothing. Love had made him dangerous, not to the throne, but to the lies that propped it up. On the night before the solstice, when the stars aligned to mirror the river's curve, Nayat was taken. The priests called it purification. The palace called it discipline. Kashta called it war. But what he did next would never be spoken aloud. He broke the seals to the inner library, stole an empty scroll of sacred lineage, and wrote their story in royal ink. He placed it in the vault meant only for names of kings and pharaohs. "If our love is a crime," he whispered, "then let it be written where even time dares not erase. But time is cruel." When Rami rose to power, he ordered the scroll burned. The scribe who defied him vanished. Nayat was never seen again. Kashta was banished to the desert's edge, where only vultures heard his name. And yet, fragments of their story, half-burned lines, a smudge of ink shaped like a tear, kept appearing in forgotten tombs. Two names, one archaeologist wrote centuries later, always scratched beneath the prayers: Nayat, Kashta, as if someone kept rewriting what others tried to destroy. And so the love they tried to erase became eternal, not by decree, but by defiance, scratched in stone, whispered in wind, hidden in shadows. For even in a land of gods and kings, sometimes the truest legacy is love that refuses to die. He had no name left, only a title: the one who writes in ash. The scribe who had once chronicled Kashta's conquests and Nayat's ascensions now lived in the ruins beneath the old granary, surrounded by broken jars, rat bones, and a single clay lamp that never stayed lit for long. His crime was ink, black, rebellious ink. He had etched a love story the gods themselves would have envied, and for that, he had been cast out of the house of life. But even stripped of station, he still wrote, for some truths were louder than exile. His fingertips bore the stains of forbidden lines. Hidden in a bundle of reeds, he kept copies, not full scrolls, but fragments. Kashta's oath, Nayat's prayer, a half-verse of their first meeting under the star-stone arch. He had memorized them all, and each night he muttered them like spells. They came to him in dreams, Kashta whispering, "Let the ink run deeper than blood," and Nayat smiling beneath a veil of tears. It was not madness, it was memory. And memory was dangerous. One evening a girl arrived, no older than 15, wrapped in a tattered linen robe. with eyes that burned too brightly for someone so poor. She had been told he knew things, not stories, but truths. "Is it real?" she asked, holding out a broken shard of painted pottery bearing the word Ka, the spirit. "Where did you find this?" he rasped, his voice a shredded reed. "In the eastern necropolis," she said, "buried beneath a false wall. There were more words I could not read, but this one was clear." He snatched it, cradled it, and wept. "It is from her grave," he said. "Not yet." The girl blinked. "But there is no record she was buried at all." He chuckled bitterly. "That is the point." For years, he had believed her body was cast to the crocodiles or left in the desert. But if there was a tomb, if her name was etched with reverence, then someone defied the order. Someone risked everything. "Take me," he said. "Show me." The girl hesitated. "It's dangerous. The new overseer forbids anyone from—" "I was there when pharaohs wept. I was there when truth bled into scrolls. If you do not take me, I will go blind into the sand until the wind carries my bones to her door." She nodded. And that night, under a moon veiled in clouds, the two crept across the city's edge, past the broken idols, past the salt pits, into the land where tombs whispered louder than priests. When they reached the site, he fell to his knees. There it was, crudely built, half buried, but real. A tomb. And above its lintel, carved not in gold but in charcoal, were the words, "Here lies the one who served the gods with truth and loved without shame." No name, no royal seal, but inside, upon the crumbling stone, was a painting. Faded, yes, but unmistakable. Two figures, a man offering water to a woman. She was wounded, her wrists bound in ritual ropes. But she was smiling. The man knelt, pouring from a bowl, and next to them, in the smallest script, was one word. Kashta. The scribe's heart buckled. He fell forward, pressing his forehead to the tomb's edge. "They thought they erased her," he whispered. "But love, real love, always returns, even if only as a rumor carried by dust." Behind him, the girl stood silent, her fingers curling tightly around the shard. She did not yet understand, but soon she would. For every erased story needed a new writer, and she had just become one. Her name was Sia, though the scribe never asked. He only called her Papyrus, as if she were not flesh and blood, but something sacred meant to carry truth. From that night forward, she returned to him daily, bearing questions like offerings. Why did they erase her? What power does love threaten? Why do kings fear stories? He would smile with cracked lips and reply, "Because stories outlive crowns." Sia began to learn the old script, her hands trembling over faded glyphs as the scribe taught her the way Nayat once learned. Slowly, reverently, as if each mark could summon spirits. She slept little, spoke less, and every free moment she could steal from her basket-weaving duties she spent beneath the granary with the scribe, translating fragments that had no place in the temples above. One day, she uncovered something new, a stone tablet buried beneath a pile of rat-chewed mats. It had one phrase carved with fury. She saw the gods and chose the man instead. Sia read it aloud, and the scribe froze. That phrase had once been part of the temple's inner dogma, used only when casting out those who broke divine law. "This," he said, "is what they accused her of, blasphemy of the soul." But to Sia, the words felt like praise. What greater courage than to choose love over myth? She clutched the tablet to her chest, feeling a fire stir beneath her ribs. "I want to rewrite her story," she said. "All of it, with names, with truth." The scribe nodded. "Then you must find the final scroll, the one Kashta wrote before he vanished." He told her where it had last been seen, in the ruins of the Falcon Library, now a collapsed sanctuary deep in the desert, guarded not by men but by venomous myths and salt storms. No one who entered its shadow returned. "That is why no one found the full truth," he said, "because they feared what it would cost to uncover it." Sia looked at her ink-stained fingers. Then I will go." The scribe tried to stop her. "You are not a scribe. You are still a girl." But Sia only smiled. So was Nayat, and still she dared. She left that night with only a water skin, a walking stick, and the fragment of pottery with Ka inscribed on it, now worn on a string around her neck. For days she crossed cracked plains and ghost dunes, where winds sang dirges and the stars hid behind ash-colored clouds. On the 5th night, when her lips were cracked and blood rimmed her ankles, she saw it. The ruins. The great winged falcon once carved above the arch was broken, its beak lost in sand, but the doors beneath it still stood. As she entered, the air thickened. Whispers greeted her, not words, but sensations, heat, sorrow, remembrance. Inside, broken shelves leaned like drunk prophets, and papyrus leaves littered the floor like dry tears. Then she saw it, half buried under a pile of bricks, wrapped in decayed linen. A scroll sealed with a wax emblem, a sun pierced by a single tear. She opened it slowly. It began, "If you find this, then you already know what they tried to hide. My name is Kashta. I was once a prince, but I chose a woman instead of a throne. This is our story, and it is not over." Sia fell to her knees. The scroll pulsed with truth. It was raw, unfinished, written not with ceremony but with agony. It ended mid-line. The ink splattered. "They have come for her. I will not run. If I fall, let the one who finds this finish what I could not." She clutched it to her chest. "I will," she whispered. "I will finish it. And this time no one will erase it." Sia didn't return through the desert as a girl. She returned as a fire clothed in flesh. Her feet bled, her eyes burned, and her voice had changed. It no longer asked. It declared. The scroll was tied to her waist beneath her robe, wrapped in palm bark and linen soaked in myrrh to protect it from decay. She had read it 10 times during her return, memorizing each line as if it were her own breath. Kashta's words weren't just about love. They were a confession, a rebellion, a prayer. They told of how he had bargained with the Nubian sentries to hide Nayat in the hills after the temple accused her of seduction, how he had faked her death to the court and paid a tomb builder in obsidian to create a false burial site. But something had gone wrong. He had returned one night and found only blood. Either she died in silence, he had written, or she fled deeper into the desert where even gods cannot follow. He blamed himself. "My love doomed her," he said. "But if love doomed her, then truth must free her." Sia repeated that line over and over until it no longer sounded like words, but a beat in her chest. When she arrived back at the granary, the scribe lay on a mat, barely breathing. He opened one eye as she entered and saw the bark-wrapped scroll. Tears welled. "You found it?" "No," she said. "It found me." She sat beside him, unwrapped the scroll, and began reading it aloud. Each word was a resurrection. When she finished, the scribe placed a trembling hand on her arm. "You must write the rest." "I will," she said, "but not in secret. Not this time." And so, with trembling courage, Sia did the unthinkable. She walked into the Hall of Records at midday, where scribes dipped pens and priests murmured litanies. She stood before the central altar and unrolled the scroll across the sacred sandstone. "This is the truth of Nayat and Kashta," she said, "buried by power, preserved by love, and now returned to the light." A silence followed, then a laugh, a sharp one. The high priest of Mayat stepped forward, robes swaying like reeds in a storm. "Another tale of passion and defiance. What makes yours different from the 1,000 others?" Sia looked him in the eye. "This one has a soul." He moved to tear it, but a younger priest blocked him. "Wait, I know that name. Kashta. My grandfather told stories of him. Forbidden ones. He said they burned the truth." Another priest nodded. Then another. Whispers spread like fire. Sia stood firm. "Burn it again if you must, but every time you do, someone like me will come back, with more fire, more ink, more truth." The high priest's hand hovered above the scroll, but he didn't tear it. He looked at the faces around him, saw uncertainty, hesitation. Power shifted like sand beneath his feet. "Let it be recorded," he said coldly. "But in the apocryphal wing, among the myths," Sia smiled, "even myths are more eternal than kings." That night, as she inked the final page and sealed it in cedar oil, the wind outside carried dust from the tomb of Nayat, and the moon lit the page as if the gods themselves leaned in to read. Love had not won a war, but it had survived one. And survival, in Egypt, was its own kind of divinity. They came in the night, not soldiers but shadows. 3 cloaked men with the mark of the falcon burned into their arms, moving through the reed fields like smoke. Their task was clear: retrieve the scroll, silence the girl, and erase every trace. The decree hadn't come from the temples. It had come from the palace. Even after all these years, the bloodline of Rami feared the ghost of Kashta. Too many whispers were rising. Too many hearts stirred at the mention of Nayat. Truth, it seemed, still frightened kings. Sia had gone back to the tomb alone. She could not rest knowing the scroll sat locked away in an archive labeled Myth. She needed proof, not just words, but bones, symbols, relics that would speak louder than ink. The entrance was as she'd left it, crude and half-buried. But when she stepped inside this time, the air was different, still, watching, as if the tomb knew she had returned not as a mourner, but as a witness. She lit a small oil lamp and moved to the far wall where the mural had faded. She stared at it for a long time, then ran her fingers along the crack in the stone beneath the man's painted feet. A hollow echo. She dug. Beneath the loose slab, there was a hidden compartment, no bigger than a water jug. Inside lay a small carved box, wrapped in linen and sealed with wax. Her breath caught. She peeled it open and found a pendant, gold, shaped like the eye of Horus, but cracked straight down the middle. Beneath it, a clay tag. "For Nayat, when we are free." Her hands trembled. This wasn't just love. It was evidence, proof that Kashta had intended to return, that their story didn't end in tragedy, but in unfinished promises. She pocketed it and turned, just as the first man stepped into the tomb's light. His blade gleamed. "Give it," he said. "The scroll, the proof, whatever you've taken." Sia didn't flinch. "This tomb belongs to her. You have no power here. The Pharaoh says otherwise." She narrowed her eyes. "Then let him come bury me himself." She bolted past him, pushing through the narrow entrance. The second man tried to grab her, but she ducked low, kicking sand in his eyes, and ran, heart pounding, the night screaming around her. She made it to the riverbank before her legs gave out. But she did not fall alone. A woman's hand caught her. A cloaked figure stepped from the shadows. Older, face lined like parchment, but eyes fierce. "I've been waiting," she said. "You carry her fire." "Who are you?" Sia gasped. The woman held up a ring, the same symbol that had been etched in Nayat's tomb. "I am the last of those who remember. My mother was her cousin. I was raised on ashes and rumors." She took Sia's hand. "Come, you're not fighting alone anymore." Behind them, the shadows hesitated. Too many witnesses. Too much risk. They melted back into the reeds. For now. Sia collapsed into the woman's arms, but not from fear, from purpose. The pendant was still in her fist. The story had just reached its turning point. For the first time, the girl with ink in her blood wasn't just a scribe. She was a movement, and the tomb they'd tried to silence had whispered back. The city of Nekhen did not sleep that night. From the temple rooftops to the grain markets, rumors ran like floodwaters. Of a girl who escaped assassins, of a pendant that once belonged to a prince, of a tomb that defied centuries of silence. In the heart of the city, beneath the golden banners of Pharaoh Djoser, the royal court stirred with unease. The high priest of Mayat stood before the throne, face tight with false calm. "She must be dealt with, Your Grace. She threatens order, reverence, the very fabric of the two lands." The pharaoh, young, sharp-eyed, and restless, did not answer immediately. He studied a scroll placed before him, the one Sia had forced into the Hall of Records. "Do you know what strikes me most, priest?" he finally asked. "That no one has ever spoken of this Naiad, and yet she lives louder in these words than half my ancestors." "Lies endure only if left unchallenged," the priest replied. "And this girl, this Sia, is no scribe. She's a spark. Left alone, she becomes fire. Then perhaps the fire is what we need." The priest froze. "My lord?" The pharaoh rose and approached the scroll. He was young, but not blind. He knew his lineage was carved from fear and silenced truths. He had seen the people's eyes darken when forced to chant his name. Power no longer inspired, it warned. "Have her brought here," he said. "Not in chains, in light. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk elsewhere, in the hidden room beneath the weaver's quarter." Sia sat surrounded by fragments, pottery, bone etchings, bits of scroll older than dust. The woman who had saved her, Akhet, watched her work with quiet reverence. "You've stirred the waters too deep," Akhet said. "They won't ignore you now." "Then let them see what they fear," Sia answered. She placed the pendant beside a half-burned glyph from the Falcon Library. Together they told a story the court could not erase. A knock shook the stone wall behind them. Akhet's hand flew to her dagger. But it wasn't danger. It was an envoy, cloaked in royal colors. "Sia," he said gently, "you are summoned." "By the pharaoh." "Summoned or sentenced?" she asked. "Neither. He wishes to see the fire for himself." Akhet shook her head. It could be a trap, but Sia stood anyway. "Truth that hides dies. I'll walk into their fire and bring the story with me." When she entered the palace court, silence fell. Scribes dropped their pens. Guards straightened. The pharaoh sat beneath a canopy of blue and gold, eyes locked on the girl with nothing but a satchel of broken proof and dust-stained skin. "You risk your life for a story?" he asked. "I risk it for the right to remember," Sia replied. "Then tell me, from the beginning." And she did. Every word, every line Kashta wrote, every tear the scroll bore. She showed the pendant, the tomb etchings, the false lineage carved to erase Naiad. And as she spoke, something shifted in the room, not just in the faces of the nobles, but in the air itself. It was as if the palace listened. At the end, the pharaoh said nothing. He simply walked down from his throne, took the scroll, and placed it on the altar beside the Book of Kings. "Let it be recorded," he said. "Naiad lived, Kashta loved." And their story was real. The high priest's mouth fell open. "My lord, you cannot—" "I am not asking," the pharaoh said. "I am rewriting." And the palace, for the first time in centuries, burned with truth, not fire. The wind carried it first. Not the news of Sia's triumph, but the feeling of it. A stillness before storm, a shift in the rhythm of temple bells, as if the gods themselves leaned closer to listen. Across Nekhen, people began whispering her name in the same breath as Naiad's, not as rumor, but as rebirth. Old women clutched amulets tighter. Farmers paused under the sun and told children of a prince who loved louder than law. Truth had escaped its scroll and now walked barefoot through the streets. The high priest of Mayat, stripped of his sway, paced his private chamber like a beast in a collapsing cage. "She's just a girl," he spat. "A girl who made you irrelevant," muttered his assistant. The priest struck him. "Find her weakness. Find something the pharaoh can't protect." But he knew. Sia had already passed beyond their reach. They had fought ink with fear and lost. Asterisk, 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 Sia sat in the courtyard of the palace library, surrounded by reed scribes and apprentices begging to copy her words. But she refused to let anyone else touch the original scroll. "Truth must bleed into the hand that writes it," she said. So she began rewriting the story herself, line by line, by moonlight. She didn't change Kashta's words. She only finished them. And when she reached the part where he vanished from the desert after trying to find Naiad, she paused. "He didn't just disappear," she whispered. "He became legend." Akhet sat beside her, cleaning the pendant. Or martyr. Same thing in this land. No, Sia said. I believe he lived. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered the palace archive, where her scroll now rested beneath crystal. She stood before it, heart aching. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. It's missing something. She turned sharply. An old man, hooded, hunched, with eyes like dusk. Who are you? She asked. Once, I was called Tebin, he said. I knew Kashta. I buried his ring with him. Sia stepped closer. You knew him? I was a boy tending camels when he arrived at the edge of our village, starved and silent, carrying nothing but a broken pendant and a name he wouldn't speak. The man pulled a cloth from his satchel and unwrapped a second pendant, twin to the one Sia had found, whole, uncracked. He gave this to me when he died, told me to return it only when someone proved the story still lived. Sia took it in her hands. Her breath caught. This changes everything. No, Tebin said. You already changed everything. I'm just closing the circle. The next morning, Sia entered the court again, this time not with parchment, but with proof that pulsed. She placed both pendants before the pharaoh and said, He survived. He hid. He waited. And still, his truth found me. The pharaoh stood and held both relics high. Let it be known. Kashta's line did not end in betrayal, and Nayet's memory will not be bound in silence. And for the first time in known Egyptian history, the palace rang not with conquest, but with applause. Sia walked out into the sunlight, the crowd parting as if she were both priestess and queen. But she wore no crown, only dust. Because dust now had a voice, and that voice was writing Egypt anew. The decree spread like fire lit on the Nile's breath. Record their names in the Book of Eternal Echoes. Not the official Book of Kings, no, but something older, deeper, hidden in the catacombs beneath the grand temple of Heliopolis. Only the most sacred truths were written there. Truths too dangerous for daylight, but too divine to destroy. Sia was escorted with torches and silence. The high priest had vanished. Some said he had fled across the river in shame. Others whispered he had taken his own tongue to silence himself forever. No one mourned. As Sia descended the cold spiral into the heart of the catacombs, each step felt heavier than the last. Akhet followed close behind, guarding both girl and scroll with eyes like sharpened obsidian. At the lowest chamber, the door stood shut, sealed with copper and a single hieroglyph carved deep. Heka, the word for magic, for power, for truth. The keeper of the book stood waiting, an old woman with skin like bark and fingers stained black. Why do you come? She asked. To add what was erased, Sia answered. To finish what Kashta began. The woman nodded. Then bleed for it. She offered Sia a reed quill sharper than bone. No ink, only blood for the Book of Eternal Echoes. Sia did not hesitate. She drew the blade across her palm, let the blood drip into the well, and dipped the quill into it. On the papyrus older than dynasties, she began, Nayet, daughter of silence, Kashta, son of rebellion, lovers, exiles, flames unextinguished. She wrote for hours, every word pulled from memory, dream, myth, and proof. And when she reached the end, she signed it simply, Sia, witness. The old woman took the page, whispered something into the papyrus, and placed it into the book. Now it will never die, she said, even if your name does. When they emerged, dawn had broken. The Nile glistened like a polished blade. But celebration was brief. Outside the palace gates, a gathering storm brewed. Nobles whispered of rebellion. A powerful general, Tamun, nephew of the deposed high priest, had begun rallying soldiers. He called the pharaoh weak, swayed by myths and girls with dusty hands. She stains the kingdom with tales, he shouted, and tales kill order. The pharaoh refused to arrest Sia. Instead, he summoned her again. Do you know what your truth has cost me? He asked. Loyal men turn from me. Generals question me. The court splinters. Truth always costs more than silence, Sia replied. But silence rots the bones of empires. He smiled wearily. Would you rule better, girl? She shook her head. I'm not meant to rule, I'm meant to remind. That night, the first fires were lit in the outer districts, Tamun's men striking fear into those who dared speak Nayet's name. Akhet watched from rooftops, her blade ready. This isn't over, she said. They won't let love win. But Sia stood tall before the crowds. It already has, she whispered, because they tried to bury it, and we made it bloom. She turned to the people. You carry her now, all of you. And they did. Women painted Nayet's eyes on their palms. Boys carved Kashta's oath into driftwood. Elders sang the story beneath the moon, and children memorized it by heart. Tamun could burn scrolls. He could strike priests, but he could not unlearn the people, because the blood that wrote the truth now pulsed in every throat. And truth, once spoken by many, becomes a weapon even gods respect. It began not with swords, but with songs. In the slums of Nekhen, a young girl stood on an overturned grain crate and sang a verse older than her mother. He kissed her wrists where ropes once lay, and called her holy still. People paused, listened, then joined in. By sunset, the tune echoed through alleys, spilling into courtyards, bleeding into temple walls. Soldiers posted outside the palace flinched as they heard it. They had been told it was treason, but it felt like prayer. Tamun seethed. They raise hymns to a whore and a traitor, he snarled, slamming a goblet against stone. The pharaoh has failed. Egypt listens to a girl and a ghost. His supporters, landowners, old priests, exiles from the capital, rallied beneath his banner of restored purity. Bring back order, they cried. Silence the scribe. But silence, by now, was impossible. Sia walked through the city without guards. People followed, not to beg, but to bear witness. They carried broken jewelry, shards of old murals, burned fragments of names, all the things they had hidden when the purge began. These, one woman said, were Nayet's echoes. We kept them alive in dark rooms. Now we give them back to the light. Sia collected them into a cart and brought them to the palace gates. She laid each item before the pharaoh without speaking. He studied them in silence, his hands trembling as he held a child's drawing of Kashta beside a flower, drawn in charcoal, barely legible, but unmistakable. The story has become theirs, he murmured, and no sword can cut a story. That night, Tamun struck. He sent 50 men into the city, torches raised, scrolls burned in the square, chants forbidden by decree. But the people didn't scatter. They formed a wall, not with weapons, but with their bodies. Sia stood at the front, scroll in hand. You'll have to burn me next, she said. One soldier stepped forward, then paused. I lost my sister to a lie, he whispered. They said she shamed the temple, but she only loved. He dropped his torch. Others followed. Within minutes, Tamun's army was dust. The general fled east, chased not by warriors, but by names, painted on doors, chanted by children, written on the backs of their hands. Kashta, Nayet, Sia. The pharaoh emerged the next day, not with decree, but with ink. He held a new scroll, written in his own hand, and read it from the palace steps. Let the record show that love, once forbidden, now feeds the heart of Egypt. Let truth no longer kneel. He named Sia the keeper of memory, a title once given only to men who served the gods, now reborn in a girl who served the truth. Akhet wept silently in the crowd. She had seen nations fall for less. She had watched kings bend for nothing. But this girl had bent the course of history with a single story and the blood of her hand. That night, a final ceremony was held. In the garden behind the palace, under a sky slick with stars, a tomb was built, not for a body, but for a truth. Inside it lay both pendants, the final scroll, and a mural showing Kashta lifting Nayet from a sea of darkness. Sia placed her reed pen beside them. Now they'll never have to speak in whispers again, she said. As the stone sealed, Wind rustled the reeds like applause. The gods, it seemed, had listened. And they too had chosen to remember. Years passed, and Egypt changed. But slowly, like the river shifting its banks. The tale of Nayat and Kashta, once whispered in fear, now echoed in songs, sculpture, and scroll. Children painted them not as rebels, but as founders of a new truth, one not etched in conquest, but in courage. Sia, now older, wore no crown, bore no title but the one she earned, Mother of Memory. Her ink-stained hands became a symbol. Wherever she traveled, across Thebes, into Memphis, beyond the Red Land, people carried their stories to her like offerings. My brother was beaten for loving another caste. My grandmother was exiled for refusing a forced bond. My daughter left the temple to raise her voice, not just prayers. To each, Sia listened, and then she wrote. But in her heart, the fire of that first scroll never dimmed. She returned every year to the tomb that held the pendants and the final mural, clearing dust from the stones with the same care a priestess might offer a relic. One year, she found a surprise, a fresh carving, newly etched beside the mural. It showed Nayat standing tall, unbound, hair free, hands open, not as a victim, but as a goddess of defiance. "Who did this?" she asked a nearby boy collecting herbs. He pointed east. "A woman came last night. She didn't say her name, but she cried like the Nile and carved like she knew the stone." Sia touched the carving, and for the first time in decades, she felt tears rise. Not for sorrow, but for knowing that the story had passed beyond her. It was no longer hers to guard. It had become eternal. But not everyone celebrated. Deep in the delta, remnants of Tamun's bloodline plotted in shadows. They spoke of cleansing, of restoring purity, of rewriting what had been poisoned. They raised scrolls blackened by false histories and trained their sons to scorn truth spoken by women. One night they came for the tomb. They burned the reeds, shattered the outer stones, and tried to unearth the final mural. But what they found shook them. Not just the mural, but dozens of replicas hidden behind it. Children had copied it. Artists had painted it anew. Travelers had made impressions with charcoal. What had once been a singular secret was now infinite. One of the raiders knelt beside a fresh stone, newly placed. It read, "You can break a tomb, but not a memory." And above it, another carving, this time of Sia, pen in hand, flame in heart. The next morning, word spread that the tomb had been attacked, but no one mourned. They rebuilt it that same afternoon, bigger, brighter, its walls lined with names of others who had once been erased. And at its center, on golden papyrus, they etched one final line. They tried to bury a girl, but they planted a story. Sia, watching from afar, knew she would die soon. She had lived long, but never empty. She returned to the Nile one last time, letting the water touch her fingers. "Nayat," she whispered. "Kashta, we finished it." As her breath faded, the wind rose, not in grief, but in triumph. It carried her final thought across Egypt, through tomb and temple, past scroll and sword. You can silence a voice, but not a truth written with love. And so ended the life of the girl they tried to erase. And so began the story they never could.